Threshold Station did not look dangerous from the outside. It hung in the dark between two dead moons, a wide ring of metal and light, slowly turning. Supply ships came and went. Diplomatic shuttles docked at the upper ports. Cargo lifts hummed up and down the central spine. To anyone watching from a distance, it looked like nothing more than a busy crossing point, a place where people stopped on their way to somewhere else. But Threshold Station was the most important place in this corner of the galaxy right now, and almost everyone aboard knew it. The Salon Collective and the Earth Interstellar Accord had been circling each other for 11 years. 11 years of small meetings, careful letters, and slow agreements that never quite became anything real. Now finally, there was a summit, a real one. The kind where people signed things and shook hands and smiled for the record. The treaty being discussed would open 3 major transit corridors, establish shared trade rights across 14 star systems, and set the terms for how 2 very different civilizations would live next to each other for the next century. It was, by any measure, a significant moment. Nora Callum was 9 years old and did not care very much about transit corridors. She sat cross-legged on the floor of Observation Deck C, which was one of the quieter spots on the station. A long, curved room with wide windows that looked straight out into open space. Most of the adults used the main observation lounge on the upper ring. This one was smaller, less polished, and rarely crowded. Nora liked it for exactly those reasons. Brixel was draped across her knee like a warm scarf. Brixel was small, roughly the size of a large house cat, with a round body, 4 short legs, and skin that shifted between a soft amber and a pale blue depending on mood. Right now Brixel was amber, which meant content. The creature made a low hum that was not quite a purr but served the same purpose. Nora ran 2 fingers slowly along Brixel's back and looked out at the stars. Brixel had been a gift. 2 years ago, at a smaller diplomatic meeting on Outpost Ven, a Solon cultural representative had presented the creature to Nora's mother as a gesture of goodwill. Ambassador Lyra Callum had accepted graciously, and then, that same evening, handed the small creature to her daughter because Nora was the one who had immediately knelt down and offered it her hand. That was usually how Nora operated. While the adults were still deciding what to think, Nora had already introduced herself. The two had been together ever since. Nora heard the distant sound of shuttle engines, the 3rd Salon transport arriving that day. She could not see it from this window, but she knew the docking schedule. She had read it that morning the same way other children read storybooks, carefully and with full attention. Her father called it a habit. Her mother called it a gift. Her teacher, a tired man named Instructor Feld, called it slightly unnerving in a child her age. She heard footsteps behind her and did not turn around. "They're all here now," said the voice. It was Pren Orvath, one of the junior Salon diplomats. He sometimes passed through this deck on his way to the lower corridors. He had spoken to Nora twice before, brief exchanges, and seemed to find her interesting in the way that some adults find a strange, quiet animal interesting, cautiously, with a certain respect they hadn't decided to feel yet. Nora said, "I know." Pren stopped beside her. He looked out the window for a moment. His species was tall, pale, with long fingers and eyes that caught light in a way that always made them look slightly too alert. He glanced down at Brixel. "Does it always glow like that?" "Only when calm," Nora said. He considered that. "And when it is not calm?" "Red," she said. "But that doesn't happen much." He nodded and walked on. Nora watched the stars. Brixel shifted slightly and resettled, tucking a small head under one of Nora's hands. The amber glow brightened just a little. Nora's father, Captain Del Harrow, commanded the station's security and operational staff. Her mother led the human diplomatic team. Between them, they ran most of what mattered on Threshold Station. Nora understood this, but did not think about it often. What she thought about was simpler: her lessons, the star maps on her wall, and Brixel. She also thought, sometimes, about the way certain people moved through a room, the way they looked at things that weren't theirs, the way some people smiled with their mouths and not the rest of their face. She had seen the senior Solan delegate arrive that morning on the security feed in her father's office, where she sometimes did her reading. He was tall, older than Pren, dressed in dark formal cloth with silver at the collar. He had walked off the shuttle without looking at any of the human staff who greeted him, not looked past them, simply did not register them, like furniture. His name was Vreth Solan. He was the head of the collective's diplomatic mission and, by all formal accounts, the most important visitor on the station. Nora had watched him for about 40 seconds and then gone back to her star maps. Brixel glowed amber in the quiet room. Outside the window, the stars did not move. The summit would begin tomorrow. The reception hall on level 4 smelled like warm metal and something floral that the station kitchen staff had pumped through the vents in an effort to make the place feel less industrial. It did not entirely work, but the tables were set well, the lighting was soft, and the people filling the room had dressed carefully and were using their most pleasant voices. Diplomacy, Nora had once heard her mother say, is just good manners made very expensive. The reception was meant to be warm, informal, a chance for both sides to stand in the same room without anything being officially on record. Light food, light conversation, and the kind of smiling that happened before the real talking started tomorrow. Nora stood near the far wall with Brixel on her shoulder. Her mother had not told her to come, but had not told her to stay away either. The station had a policy permitting bonded companion animals in non-restricted spaces, and the reception hall qualified. Nora wore a clean dark jacket with her name on the collar, which was the closest thing to formal she owned. Brixel glowed a soft, calm amber, and drew a few glances, but no real concern. Nora watched the room. She watched the way the Solan delegation moved in a group, always slightly apart from the humans, like oil in water. She watched Pren Orvath standing near the window, speaking to a human engineer with what seemed like genuine curiosity. She watched her mother work the room effortlessly, moving from one small conversation to the next, never rushed, never anything less than present. She watched Vreth Solan stand near the center of the room and hold his drink without drinking it, and speak to no one unless they approached him first. He was not rude, exactly. He simply did not extend himself. He received conversation the way some people receive bad weather, tolerating it, waiting for it to pass. Nora's mother drifted close at one point and said quietly, without looking at her, "You doing all right?" "Yes," Nora said. "Brixel?" "Fine." Her mother moved on. It happened 20 minutes into the reception. Vreth was moving from one side of the room to the other, trailing 2 junior staff. He passed close to Nora, close enough that she could hear the fabric of his formal jacket shift. He glanced at Brixel on her shoulder the way a person glances at a smudge on a window. Not curious, not hostile, just briefly aware of something that did not belong. And then, without pausing, without looking directly at Nora, he reached out one hand and pushed. Not hard. That was the thing. It was not hard at all. It was the gesture of someone clearing a surface. A casual sweep of the hand, the kind of motion that required no thought, that assumed no consequence. Brixel was knocked from Nora's shoulder and hit the floor. The sound Brixel made was small. A short, soft cry, the kind of sound a small animal makes when it is startled and hurt, and does not understand why. Brixel's glow flickered from amber to a brief frightened white, then dimmed. The area went quiet in that rippling way that silence moves through a crowd. Outward from a center, one person noticing, then 2, then a dozen. Vreth did not stop walking. Ambassador Lyra Callum turned from across the room. Her expression was still, but her eyes had gone sharp. She took one step forward. Nora held up one hand. She did not look at her mother. She held the hand up and out, a flat signal, and her mother stopped. Nora bent down slowly and picked Brixel up. She held the creature against her chest and checked, carefully and without rushing, that nothing was broken. She ran her fingers along both sides, lifted each small leg, looked at the eyes. Brixel trembled once and then went still, pressing close into Nora's jacket. The glow did not come back right away. Nora straightened up. Vreth had taken 3 more steps. He was not fleeing. He simply had not registered the moment as one that required stopping. Nora looked at his back. She did not raise her voice. She spoke at normal volume, clearly, the way someone states a fact they have already confirmed. You just decided how this ends. Vreth stopped. He turned slowly and looked at her. 9 years old, small, holding a glowing alien animal against her chest. No anger in her face, no tears. Just 2 steady eyes looking directly at him with the kind of patience that did not need anything from him. He stared for 2 seconds. Then something moved across his face. Not guilt, not concern, something closer to amusement, the way adults are sometimes briefly amused by children who say serious things in serious voices. He turned away. He said something quietly to one of his staff. The staff member almost smiled. They walked on. The room began to breathe again. Conversations resumed. Someone near the food table laughed at something. Pren Orvath stood by the window and had not moved since the moment Brixel hit the floor. He looked at Nora now across the room. She was not looking at him. She was looking down at Brixel, one hand cupped under the creature, speaking very quietly. Slowly, carefully, Brixel's glow returned. Amber. Pren Orvath did not move for a long time. By the time the reception ended, everyone on the human side of the station already knew. Not because anyone announced it, not because there was a meeting or an alert. It moved the way certain information moves through a ship, through a look held a second too long, through a sentence left slightly unfinished, through the way 2 people standing near a supply corridor stopped talking when a 3rd person walked past and then resumed. In the kitchen, Warrant Officer Bessa changed the lunch allocation for the Solon delegation's private dining area. Not removed, not reduced, just quietly reorganized so that the premium items would need to go through a secondary request process instead of being automatically prepared. In the engineering bay, Senior Tech Aldrich submitted a maintenance flag on the power coupling for the Solon delegation's climate-controlled quarters. Not a shutdown, just a flag that required 2 additional sign-offs before any priority adjustments could be made. In the communications room, Operator Neves filed the daily signal report to Fleet Command 12 minutes earlier than scheduled, as she sometimes did when the traffic was light. She included a routine status note. The note was 6 lines longer than usual. None of these things were alarming. All of them were documented. None of them broke a single rule. Captain Dale Harrow heard about the incident from a junior officer named Sable, who delivered the information the way good officers deliver bad news. Standing straight, no editorializing, just the facts in order. Harrow listened without interrupting. When Sable finished, Harrow asked one question. Is Brixel all right? Sable said yes. As far as anyone could tell, the creature was shaken but unhurt. Harrow nodded once. He said, "Thank you." He did not say anything else. After Sable left, Harrow sat at his desk for a moment. Then he opened a private channel on his personal terminal and placed a call. The destination was not logged. It routed through the standard station infrastructure, but the endpoint was registered under a maintenance frequency that no one monitored closely. The call lasted 4 minutes. He closed the channel and went back to his duty log. In her quarters on the residential deck, Nora sat at her small desk with Brixel in her lap. The creature had been quiet since the reception. Not sick. Just the way an animal goes quiet after something frightening, as though it is deciding whether the world is safe again. Nora opened her personal log. She wrote the time, 2207 hours. She wrote the location, Level 4 Reception Hall. She wrote the name, Delegate Vreth Solon. She wrote, in careful, simple sentences, exactly what happened. The approach, the hand, the sound Brixel made, the way the delegate did not stop walking, the exact words she had said, the way he had laughed. She wrote it the way her father had taught her to document things. No feelings in the description, just what happened in order as clearly as possible. Feelings, Harrow had told her once, are real and they matter. But a record needs to be something anyone can read and understand, not just you. She wrote for 11 minutes and then closed the log and sat quietly with Brixel. Pren Orvath came to her quarters at 22:40 hours. He stood in the doorway with the expression of someone who had been rehearsing a conversation and now wasn't sure which version to use. He said it was a courtesy visit. The Salon delegation had a standing protocol of post-reception check-ins with the families of senior station staff. Nora opened the door fully and asked if he wanted tea. He said yes, mostly because he hadn't expected to be asked. She made it in the small unit on her shelf, a routine motion, comfortable and practiced, and handed him a cup and sat back down with Brixel. He sat in the chair across from her and looked at the star maps on her wall and then at the creature in her lap. He asked, carefully, what she had meant by what she said in the reception hall. She looked at him, not suspiciously, just levelly. She said, "I meant exactly what I said." He turned the cup in his hands. He was quiet for a moment and then asked if she had said it on her own, or if someone had told her to. She said, "On my own." He asked her if she was angry. She thought about that for a second, which was not what he expected. She said, "Not exactly." He wanted to ask more, but something in the way she was looking at him, patient, unbothered, like she had all the time in the world and was simply waiting for him to finish, made it difficult to push further. He finished the tea. He thanked her. He left. Back in his own quarters, Pren sat for a long time before he opened his personal communicator and composed a message. It was private and encrypted and addressed to a senior cultural advisor on the Salon homeworld, someone he trusted more than his official handlers. The message was short. It said, "Something happened today that I don't fully understand. I think you should know about it." He sent it and then sat in the dark and thought about the face of a 9-year-old child who had not looked angry or sad or afraid. She had looked, he realized, like someone who had already finished the math. The negotiation chamber on level 6 had no windows. This was intentional. It was a design choice made by the station's original architects to ensure that everyone in the room looked at each other instead of the stars. Long table, high-backed chairs, panels of neutral light overhead. Nothing decorative, nothing comfortable. Just a room built for 2 groups of people to sit across from each other and turn words into agreements. The Salon delegation arrived first, which was their custom. They considered it a quiet statement of seriousness. Vreth took his chair at the center of his side of the table. His staff arranged themselves around him with the practiced efficiency of people who had done this many times. He did not look particularly concerned. Yesterday's summit framework had been largely favorable to the collective. He expected today to proceed along the same lines. The human delegation arrived 2 minutes later. Vreth registered almost immediately that something was different. Ambassador Lyra Callum was present, as expected. Her staff was present. But the chair to her immediate right, which had been empty the day before, set aside as a formality, was now occupied. The man sitting in it was not from the diplomatic division. He wore a standard-issue uniform, dark with minimal marking, and he carried no briefing materials, no papers, no tablet, nothing. He simply sat with his hands loosely folded on the table and looked straight ahead. His name tag read, Admiral Soren Galka. Vreth did not know the name. He would have dismissed this except for the way 2 of his senior staff reacted when they saw the man. A brief stillness, a shared glance, the kind of micro-response that said they recognized something Vreth did not. He noted this. He said nothing. The session opened normally. Pleasantries were exchanged according to protocol. Then Ambassador Callum placed a revised document on the table and invited the Salon delegation to review the updated framework. Vreth's senior aide began reading. The first change was small. A transit fee adjustment in Corridor 7 shifted 3 percentage points. Vreth almost passed over it. The second change was not small. 3 transit corridors that had previously been open access were now listed as Class 2 restricted lanes, usable by Salon vessels but only under pre-filed passage agreements reviewed quarterly with a 48-hour standard processing window. The third change restructured the pricing model for shared trade zone access across 6 star systems. The numbers still worked, technically, but the favorable margins the collective had spent 11 years angling toward had been quietly leveled. Vreth set the document down. He said, in a measured and controlled voice, that the revised framework represented a significant departure from the goodwill both parties had worked to establish. He said it was irregular to introduce changes of this scope on the morning of final negotiations. He said it was, in his view, in poor faith. Ambassador Callum listened to all of this without any change in her expression. Then she responded, clause by clause, with a detailed explanation for each revision. Every change was tied to a regulation, a precedent, or a recently updated operational assessment. Every sentence was complete. Every reference was accurate. There was no accusation anywhere in any of it. There was no mention of a reception hall, no mention of a small animal, no mention of a child. It was simply the revised framework, with documentation. Vreth looked at it. Then he said flatly that the collective would need to reassess whether the summit could continue under these revised conditions. He let the sentence sit in the air for a moment, a familiar move, the threat to walk, which usually produced a softening on the other side of the table. Soren Galka spoke for the first time. He did not lean forward. He did not raise his voice. He spoke in the same tone one uses to describe weather. He said that as of that morning, the 6th Human Fleet Division had completed a scheduled repositioning exercise near the Dravet approach, which brought it into standard operational range of the Salon transit lanes in sectors 9 through 14. He said this was part of a routine rotation cycle. He said the scheduling was on public record and had been filed with the Intercorridor Navigation Authority 3 weeks ago. He said nothing else. He did not say, "This is a threat." He did not say, "Sign or else." He did not say anything that could be quoted, reported, or disputed. He simply made a man aware of where things were. The room was quiet for a long moment. Vreth looked at Galka. Galka looked back at him with the patience of someone who had nothing in particular to prove. Vreth looked down at the document. In the observer seats along the far wall, Pren Orvath sat very still. He was not looking at Vreth or Galka or the ambassador. He was looking at the small chair in the corner. Nora sat in it with Brixel on her lap, a data tablet balanced on her knee, reading quietly. She was not watching the proceedings with any visible interest. She turned a page. Brixel glowed amber. She did not look up. She did not need to. The treaty was signed at 1600 hours. There was no celebration on either side. A few handshakes, some photographs for the official record, documents exchanged through the standard diplomatic relay. The kind of ending that looked, on paper, like a success, and tasted, in the room, like something more complicated. Vreth signed without comment. His expression throughout had been the controlled blankness of a man performing a task he had decided not to feel. When it was done, he stood, straightened his jacket, and walked out without staying for the informal close. His senior staff followed. No one stopped them. No one had to. By the next morning, a message had arrived from the collective's administrative council. Delegate Vreth Solan was recalled for a policy review. Standard language, formally polite, the kind of message that ended a career without needing to say so directly. His replacement, a quieter man named Delegate Sorath, would arrive within the week and was described in his briefing notes as thorough, careful, and disinclined toward improvisation. Pren Orvath was not recalled. He was given a 3-day grace period before departure to complete documentation and file his formal summary report. He spent most of those 3 days in the station's lower research library writing. On the morning of his last day, he found Nora in a side corridor near the residential deck, or perhaps she found him. He was not entirely sure afterward how the meeting had happened, only that he turned a corner and she was there, walking toward him with Brixel on her shoulder, carrying a bag of feed pellets for the creature. She did not look surprised to see him. He fell into step beside her without deciding to. For a moment, neither of them said anything. The corridor hummed with the low, steady sound of the station running. Brixel turned a small head toward him and blinked. Pren said, "I want to ask you something directly." Nora said, "All right." He said, "Was it connected? What happened at the reception? The changes in the treaty? The Admiral?" She walked 2 more steps before answering. Then she said, "Brixel is fine." He stopped. She took 2 more steps and then stopped also, and looked back at him. He understood, standing in that corridor, that this was the entire answer. Not a deflection, not a refusal. It was a complete sentence that contained everything he had asked. Brixel is fine. The matter has been handled. The outcome has been settled. The sentence she had spoken 2 nights ago had turned out to be exactly what it appeared to be. Not emotion, not childish boldness, but a simple statement of fact delivered before the fact had finished happening. He said, "I want to write about this." She tilted her head slightly. "About what?" "About humans," he said. "About how you think. About what we don't understand about you." She considered that, not suspiciously. Just the way she considered most things, like she was checking it from several angles. She said, "That would be good." He almost asked another question. There were several stacked up in him. About her parents, about whether she had acted alone, about whether the 9-year-old standing in front of him understood what she had actually set in motion. But he looked at her and understood that the questions were more for his own comfort than for any practical reason. She would answer them the same way she answered everything, plainly and completely, and with no more than was necessary. He stopped himself. He reached into the side pocket of his jacket and took out a small flat disc, about the size of a coin. It was a standard diplomatic memento. The Salon gave them out as personal tokens, the equivalent of a signed card. He held it out to her. She took it and looked at it. A small engraved pattern. She turned it over once and put it in her pocket. Then he bowed. It was not the brief professional nod he had offered various station staff over the past week. It was a full Solon bow, head lowered, hands at the sides, the kind reserved in their culture for elders and teachers, and people whose wisdom outweighed their rank. His people used it rarely, and only when they meant it. Nora watched him and did not look surprised. She gave a small nod in return, not copying the gesture, not performing anything, just accepting it simply. He straightened up. He said, "Take care of Brixel." She said, "I always do." He left the corridor and did not look back. On the transport home, while the station shrank to a small ring of light in the viewport behind him, Pren opened his personal terminal and continued writing. The document he was building was not his official report. That had been filed already, clean and formal, and containing nothing that would surprise anyone. This was something else. He titled it, "A Note on Human Response Doctrine," and wrote steadily for 6 hours. The central argument was this: humans do not divide the personal from the political. To them, the two are the same calculation, different units, same scale. A harm done quietly in a room full of people is recorded, filed, and answered at a time of their choosing through channels that leave no obvious trace back to the original event. There is no human word, as far as he could determine, for the gap between an insult and its response, because to them no such gap exists. He wrote, "They are not slow to anger. They are patient with it." This is not the same thing. He wrote for 6 hours, and when he was done, he sent the document to 12 people. Weeks passed. The station settled back into its normal rhythm. Supply ships came and went. Crew rotations happened on schedule. The new Solon delegate, Sorath, arrived and moved through the station with careful, deliberate politeness, the kind of politeness that had clearly been briefed into him before departure. He greeted station staff by name. He asked questions before making requests. He had from the very first day treated the kitchen and engineering teams with the same measured courtesy he extended to the senior diplomats. It was noticed. No one made a show of it, but it was noticed. Nora resumed her lessons with Instructor Feld, who remained tired and slightly unsettled by her, and her schedule returned to its ordinary shape. Mornings in class, afternoons with her star maps and her tablet, evenings in the observation deck with Brixel. Brixel was fully recovered, back to the easy amber glow, the soft hum, the habit of falling asleep in impractical places like the center of a desk or the top of a boot. Life on the station was, by any measure, normal, but in certain places that Nora knew nothing about, things were still moving. Pren Orvath's document had been sent to 12 people. Those 12 people had shared it carefully with others. Within 3 weeks, it existed in 40 hands across 4 different civilizations. Not publicly, not as an official paper, but as the kind of document that circulates among people who pay attention to what matters. A cultural advisor on the Salon homeworld read it twice and then recommended it to two senior council members. A diplomat from an unaffiliated species called the Varith Compact read it and forwarded it without comment to their ambassador on the Joint Neutral Council. The document was not alarming. It did not describe anything violent. It did not accuse anyone of wrongdoing. It simply described carefully and clearly how humans appeared to process harm, the way they cataloged it, held it, and responded through systems that were impossible to identify as retaliatory because they were all individually routine. What it described was not a weapon, it was a disposition. And that, several readers noted quietly to themselves, was considerably harder to prepare for. 3 weeks after Pren's departure, the Varith Compact quietly updated their diplomatic interaction guidelines for stations with human residential populations. The update added 2 new categories: human civilian personnel and human juvenile personnel. Both categories were now flagged with a conduct advisory recommending that all delegates treat interactions with these individuals as equivalent in sensitivity to interactions with senior staff. The advisory was not explained in the document. It simply appeared. Another civilization, a small trading collective called the DOS Union, with no particular history of conflict with humanity, issued a similar advisory 6 days later, citing a routine protocol review. None of this ever reached Threshold Station in any official form. On the station, Nora sat in the observation deck on a quiet evening with Brixel curled against her side. She had her tablet on her knee, open to a star chart, the Drevet system, sectors 9 through 14, the same ones the Admiral had mentioned in the negotiation chamber. She was tracing the transit lanes with one finger, not studying them for any particular purpose, just learning the shape of things. She heard footsteps and looked up. Her father stood in the doorway. He was still in his duty uniform, which meant he had come directly from the operations deck. He looked at her for a moment, the way he sometimes looked at her, like he was checking something, verifying a reading. He came and sat down beside her on the floor, which was unusual. He was not a floor-sitting person by nature. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Sorath stopped me in the corridor today." Nora said, "What did he say?" Her father said, "He asked me to pass along his regards to my family." A pause. He was specific. He said, "To all members of your family." Nora looked at her star chart. Her father said, "He said it the way someone says something they mean." Nora said, "Good." Her father did not ask anything else. He sat with her for a while, looking out at the stars. Brixel stirred and moved across to sit between them, glowing steadily. After a while he got up and said he had a late report to file, and she said good night, and he left. Nora sat alone with Brixel and the stars. On her desk, back in her quarters, the personal log was still open. The last entry was from 3 days ago, a routine one, nothing significant, just a note about a particularly detailed star map she had found in the station library. But the page after the last entry had something on it. At the top of a fresh page, in the same careful handwriting she always used, she had written 4 words some time ago. She didn't fully remember when, only that it had seemed right. They were not a threat. They were not a plan. They were exactly what they looked like, a reminder to herself, in the plainest possible language, of how things worked. The 4 words were, "Note for next time." Below them, the page was still blank. There was time.